I believe that this could be one of the most important inauguration speeches in history. I rank this up there with Lincoln in 1861 and FDR in 1933 in terms of the context in which Joe Biden enters office. All of the things that he's got on his plate, a global pandemic, political division, racial injustice, climate change, on top of all of the things that you normally have to deal with as the leader of a country. It's a massive task. And Joe Biden has entered this task with an underlying message, the underlying message that he thinks is necessary to take on these challenges. The inauguration speech was all about restoring the soul of America. The soul of America. That's what this speech was all about. And I've got some notes here on how I believe he successfully or unsuccessfully imparted and got across this message of the soul of America. There's some things I can look at and I can't look at with this speech. One of the things I don't like about this type of speech, usually political speeches are like this, is the behind the lectern delivery. And it takes away a lot of the delivery and dynamism aspects of public speaking. So I'm not really going to be looking at that. All I can really look at is the words and the structure and how that was used to get the theme across. And there's lots of things that I would have liked to have covered, but the length of the video was just getting ridiculous. So I've narrowed it in to 3 key ideas. And we're going to look at how successfully Joe Biden gets across these 3 key ideas and these 3 key techniques in his speech. First thing we're looking at is the use of collective pronouns. The second thing we're looking at is common narratives. And the third thing we're looking at is the use of contrast to develop the argument. So without any further preamble, let's get over to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to start breaking down key aspects of Biden's speech and seeing if he can project the soul of America.
But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union.
Okay, this is an issue that I have with Biden's speech. And I know what he's trying to do here. Throughout this speech, he uses a lot of collective pronouns. It's about us and it's about we. And in some sense, this matches his overarching theme of unity. But here's the issue with it. When Biden says we and us, the only people who hear that are Democrats. Any Republican watching this, when Biden says we or us, assumes that it's not referring to them. A collective pronoun only works when you have that group buy-in. So you can use it when you're speaking at the Democratic National Convention because everyone there buys into that collective. What I think Biden should be doing here is instead of using we and us, is use you. You. You is a fantastic word in the English language because it's simultaneously a singular and a plural pronoun. If you look at other languages, like for example, French, they split this into 2 words. You have tu, which is you, the individual. That's you watching this video right now. But also there is vous, which is the collective you people, you folks, you guys, you gals. In English, we don't have that distinction. Sometimes you might say you guys or you people, and that shows that it's the collective. But when you just use the word you, there's a little bit of ambiguity in here. And I think Biden would be much more effective trying to address the individual watching this. Because I can guarantee that the hardline Republicans are not watching this. But some of the moderates and the independents may be watching this. And that, I think, is who Biden should be trying to target with this speech. That's who he's appealing to. He knows that 70 million people voted for the other guy. And he's not going to win them all over, but he might win some of them over. And I think if he starts addressing them as you, it's more personal, it's more directed. By falling into the collective pronoun of us and we, anyone viewing that just thinks he means Democrats. Whether they are Democrats and they go, yes, that's us, or whether it's Republicans and they go, no, that's not us.
Once in a century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II.
That is a startling analogy. I only found this out, I think, the day of the inauguration, that they suspected Biden was going to say something about this. That analogy really puts things into perspective. And it's one of the analogies that Biden uses throughout this speech. And the power of the analogy of World War II is it is a very unifying analogy. It's a shared experience that a lot of the country can resonate with and get behind. There's a lot of feeling of we were all coming together for that. We were all on the right side for that. We put aside our differences for the greater cause of fighting a greater evil. So not only does that analogy really put things into perspective, it's also yet an analogy that creates this idea of unity, that we have to have the same collective spirit fighting the pandemic as we did when we were so successful in coming together in World War II.
To restore the soul and secure the future of America requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this.
So that was a bit of a longer clip that I played there, but I wanted to keep it running because I wanted you to spot the repetition of the themes. Unity, soul, the soul of America equals unity. Quoting Abraham Lincoln, that my whole soul will be in this, that my whole soul will be in this. I mean, this really is the sledgehammer of this is the theme of my speech. This is the underlying message that I'm trying to get across to you, that we need to get back the soul of America. Remember that this is the overarching message of this whole speech. And the way that we do that is through unity. Now, as well as really hammering home this point, there's another little technique here that I think that Biden is using well. He's quoting Abraham Lincoln. He's quoting someone who has high popularity. Whether you ask Democrats or Republicans or independents, Lincoln has a very favorable popularity and a very favorable opinion. And it's also worth remembering that Lincoln was a Republican president. So by quoting a past president who was Republican and quoting a president who has high popularity, Biden is essentially attaching the social proof of what Lincoln said, that Lincoln said the same thing a century and a half ago that I'm saying to you now. And it's just adding that extra little bit of social proof to his message that, look, this isn't just something that I've made up and something that I'm trying to push on you. This is a truth that has been spoken before. So that 30-second segment in particular is really trying to hammer home this point and using those buzzwords and those buzz phrases of soul and unity in a very short stretch of time.
I know, speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days.
Oof. Now what's coming in here? Anytime that you are presenting an argument, you have to acknowledge the other side of the argument. And this is what's created the polarized division that we have nowadays across multiple fronts. Politics is just one of them. Is that politics nowadays has got entrenched in its own arguments. And when you get entrenched in your own arguments, you just have two sides that are shouting at each other. The way that you win people over is to acknowledge and understand their side of the argument. And that's how you start to pull people into the center ground, into that middle ground where ultimately views can be changed and compromises can be reached. What Biden's doing here is he's acknowledging, I know all this talk seems stupid, because he knows that's what a lot of people are thinking. A lot of Democrats are going, how could we possibly find unity of the Republicans? A lot of the Republicans are going, how could we possibly find unity of the Democrats? What Biden's doing here is when you acknowledge what someone is thinking and when you show that you understand what they're thinking, you begin to bring them on side. It's that first extension of empathy. And empathy is the key ingredient to winning over anyone in life. And so that's what Biden's doing here, is he's starting to actually present somewhat of a counter argument to unity, starting to show, look, I know this is some of the doubts and concerns that you have, and I'm going to address them in this speech.
Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward.
This is an interesting passage, and there's a lot in it that I can start to unpick. It begins with establishing a common narrative. Remember I was talking about earlier how World War II is such a universal and such a unifying idea, that it's something that we all went through together and we all came through together. And the examples that he's listing in this, Civil War, Great Depression, the World Wars, 9/11, these are all the common narrative of the American people. And it's something that all Americans can resonate with and connect with, that, you know what, we came through these struggles together as a country. And this is really important when you're trying to establish any kind of group identity. And what Biden's really trying to do here is he's trying to create a group identity of one America, not Republican America and Democrat America, one America. And to do this, he needs that common narrative. And that's what he's beginning to establish with these universal stories and universal ideas. There's something else interesting that came right at the end of that passage. Well, Biden says enough of us came together to help all of us. And this, to me, and again, I mentioned it earlier, is an acknowledgement that Biden knows he can't win over everyone. He knows there are hardline Republicans, there are hardline Trump supporters who are never, ever going to endorse him and change their mind. He's not trying to speak to that particular group. He knows that's a lost cause. Where he recognizes that he can bring together some of the unity and some of the cooperation is those Republicans and those independents who weren't so sure about him. And they voted one way, but it wasn't necessarily an automatic decision for them. And if he can show them that he can bring together Americans in this common group, using this common narrative, that's who he can win over. And when you don't have this 50-50 split of us versus them, if he can start to shift that of having 60, 70, 80% of the country on board, that's not perfect union, but it's bringing around a lot more unity and a lot less division and discord than what there is now. So I think that this is actually quite clever from Biden, that he's recognizing that, as all speakers should, you will never win over 100% of your audience. You could be in an auditorium of 10,000 people and you're getting a standing ovation, and there's still one person who is looking around wondering, why is everyone standing up and clapping? I thought that was pretty rubbish. You're never going to win over everyone as a speaker. What's important is recognizing who you can win over and really speaking to them and addressing them and showing that you understand where they are in life and showing them that you know how you can lead them to something better.
For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos.
What Biden's doing here is he's providing the contrast. He's showing people this is the alternative. If we don't have unity, this is the state of affairs. And is this the state that you want to live in? If it's not, then what are we going to do instead? And so by providing the alternative, by acknowledging and providing the opposing argument, you actually reinforce and strengthen your argument. That's exactly what he's done there. He's gone over to the other side and he's provided the contrast of saying, this is what happens if we don't do anything. And that's a huge trigger point as a speaker. What you're trying to demonstrate to your audience is, this is what happens if you don't do anything. If you don't make that change, if you don't act on this, if you don't try and do something better, this is the way that things are going to be. And we can be better than that. And you can be better than that.
This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge.
What Biden's now doing here with this next line is he's linking back to that common narrative he established earlier. Remember the Civil War, the Great Depression, the World Wars, 9/11? He built up that common narrative that can create that group identity. And now he's bringing that forward into the present context. In the future, when people talk about the history of America, they are going to say Civil War, Great Depression, World Wars, 9/11, COVID-19. He's putting this current situation in the bracket of all of those previous challenges. And again, he did that earlier. Remember how he linked the pandemic to the casualties of World War II? What he's trying to do is he's trying to insert this narrative that COVID-19 is a national emergency that we need to come together for. And he's using the building blocks and the foundation that he's set up already to be able to thread this new narrative into that existing narrative. And so start to cohese and strengthen the group ties and this group identity, going back to that overarching message. The soul of America and unity lies in coming together for this challenge of the pandemic.
Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth.
I'm not so sure on this particular passage. And it's not that the sentiment behind it isn't a good sentiment. Where I have issue here is this was very subjective and intangible. And I think just a simple alteration could have made this stronger. I think the lead up was good of talking about how love brings us together. And that's a really powerful message. And actually, to hear a president using the word love, that's not something that you consider to be masculine and authoritative and the mark of a leader. So I am really impressed and really proud that Biden can bring in love into leadership. But then here's where I have issue. He says, I think we all know what we love as Americans. And then he just rattles off a load of buzzwords: honor, dignity, respect, the truth. What does that mean? How can you connect with that word? And if you do, how can you get that commonality of connection? Because there's many people in the country who are considering this address to be dishonorable. So when they hear the word honor, they aren't going to resonate with that. They aren't going to share a collective understanding of it. What I think Biden needs to do here instead is he needs to provide real examples. And I would actually encourage him to go into a little bit of an element of triviality here. Say, what do Americans love? Well, we do love our liberty. We do love that we have the American dream, that we aspire to do better, where we love football, we love baseball, we love Ben and Jerry's ice cream, we love having Apple computers. Start to get a lot more everyday and a lot more trivial, because that's what Americans will see and connect with and understand. They will go, I love baseball, me too. I own an Apple computer, me too. I'm eating Ben and Jerry's ice cream, me too. When you use these vague terms such as honor, respect, you don't get that me too connection. And considering what Biden's trying to do here in terms of unity and trying to get that collective buy-in, I think he's missed an opportunity here. I think he needed to get a lot more specific and, weirdly enough, a lot more trivial. He's operating in far too grand a vision here. People don't buy into honor, respect, and liberty until they start thinking about honoring their neighbor, until they start thinking about having the dignity of Social Security, until they start thinking about having the respect of their common sports team. All of this stuff, that's where you need to connect people with. And when you get them on the small stuff, that's when you can start to introduce them to the big stuff. If you just hit them with the big stuff, then they've got no connection and no common rapport and understanding of these terms that you're using.
Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next.
That's exactly what I was talking about. That's the type of targeted individual address that people connect with. And it's lovely that he's using the story of his dad here as well. It's sentimental, it's emotional, but also it's something that people can connect with and understand. Because there will literally be people viewing this who say, I lie in bed at night thinking those things. All of that list. Am I going to keep my job? Am I going to be able to pay the mortgage? Those are individual experiences that people can resonate with. People don't resonate with the abstract concept of honor. They resonate with the individual experience of lying awake at night thinking, can they pay their bills? This is exactly the example I was talking about. Biden, if you'd stuck this in 30 seconds earlier, this would have worked so much better.
My sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen.
That is incredible. That, I think, is one of my favorite parts of the speech. Having the courage to not speak is one of the most powerful things that we can do as a speaker. Right here, Biden is addressing the nation, and the temptation is wanting to get across his words, his agenda, his beliefs, his vision, and to take that time, to take that moment of silence. That is a collective action. All of those people who bowed their heads, who honored the dead, honored the loss, honored the memory of loved ones. There will be people watching this speech who have lost loved ones to COVID. That was a hugely powerful and also symbolic act. And I don't think that he meant this as a tactic. I think this is something that genuinely came from the heart and came from sentiment of mourning and the loss of so many American lives. Being able to bring people together in that collective, that's what we're talking about in this speech, is trying to find that unity. And yes, sometimes it's horrific that this happens, but often it's the loss that brings about the most unity. Think of those examples he was talking about earlier: Civil War, Great Depression, World Wars, 9/11. These were moments of great loss and tragedy. But in loss and tragedy, we sometimes find those common bonds. We sometimes find those things that unite us, not divide us. And taking a moment just to mark that and honor that was a hugely powerful gesture in this speech. And getting the audience to actually interact with you, that's one of the basics of speaking skills, is being able to form interaction with your audience. Getting the nation to take a few minutes, well, not even a few minutes, it was a few seconds, wasn't it? But just those few seconds of prayer, that was pretty powerful.
I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era.
There it is. That's the individual address. I promise you, you and I. We're nearly 19 minutes into this 22-minute speech, and this is the first time that Biden has made that individual address. This is what I was talking about earlier. Do you feel the difference when he says, I promise you? Do you feel the difference when he says you and I? The we and the us, it's too abstract, it's too subjective. You've got to address people at the individual level. And I'm glad that we're finally seeing it, but for me, this took far too long. If there were maybe some casual viewers who wanted to tune in, some of that undecided category that we were talking about earlier, those that maybe people who voted Democrat because they thought the alternative was worse, maybe the independents who never know exactly what side they're going to come down on, maybe some of the moderate Republicans who didn't want to vote for Trump, but they also didn't like the alternative either. That middle ground that Biden's trying to win over, they might have begun watching this speech, but they might not have felt that this was a speech for them. If you're waiting 80 minutes, what's that? About 90% of your total speech time before you start addressing the individuals in the audience, it's too late. You've lost the opportunity. So I'm glad we're seeing a little bit of this coming in, but it needed to be so much earlier. I actually think he should have swapped around his use of pronouns. He should have gone to the individual you before he started talking about we and us. And if there's one major criticism that I have of this speech, that would be it. That it was based too much on the collective and not trying to get the individual first and bring them in to the overall collective. Essentially, for me, this speech is the wrong way around in terms of structure. We've talked about a lot of good techniques so far, just needed to flip that around. We needed to get the individual address before the collective.
Thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness.
Here's that contrast again. He's presenting, here's the way things will be if we don't have unity. All of those negatively framed words. And then contrasting them against, here's what we can have instead. Here's the opportunity. Here's all of these positively valence words. So he starts off with that contrast of this is the way that things are, or the way that things could be, and this is where we can get to. And then after he's presented the contrast, he leans right in to that other alternative, talking about greatness and goodness, love, all of those strong positive words. Now, remember earlier, I gave him a bit of a hard time for using these broad words, these subjective words, honor, dignity, respect. It's not that these words don't have meaning, but you need the context for them first. So if he provided those specific examples earlier on of baseball and Ben and Jerry's and whatever else he wanted to talk about, he can now bring in those broad ideas here because we have the context and specificity for them. So that when we're presented between the choice of division and unity, we go, I want some of that unity because I know that's Ben and Jerry's and it's greatness and goodness at the same time. So this would work better if we'd had some of that earlier framing. So the contrast is good, but again, I think with those earlier improvements, this is his final summary, really. I've paused the video on 21:12. He's pretty much at the end of his speech. This is the message that he's wanting to send people off with. And I feel that there's just a little something missing from this message because we didn't get that clear specificity, visualization, and common rapport that we could have done with this final send-off. And I'm not saying that that wasn't there at all during this speech, but I think there was a few missed opportunities. And although I think the speech generally works well, I don't think he's winning over too many non-Democrats with this speech. And that's the real issue because his message and his purpose was to begin that process. Now, he's not going to win over 70 million people who 2 months ago voted for the other guy. Let's be realistic here. But he's got to start that process with his first day in office. And if he doesn't do that, he's got a long road ahead of him. And I feel that this speech, not that it has done nothing at all, but it's missed a few key opportunities. And I wonder how many of those 70 million will be coming over in the next year, by the midterms in 2 years' time, by the next election in 4 years' time. Now, I'm not pinning and blaming all of that on this speech. Obviously, there's a lot of actual work in the office to be done. But considering how important these inauguration speeches have been in the past, this one could be considered right up there with some of the key ones if it achieves the desired result, if it restores the soul of America, and if it brings together that unity. And I think overall, it's got some of that message across, but I feel there's a few missed opportunities. And I wonder how many opportunities you can afford to miss with the way that things are in the current state of the world. So how do you think Biden did? Do you think he was successful in getting across his message of soul of America? I think generally speaking, this speech was a good speech. And I think generally speaking, he was better for doing the speech than not doing the speech. There are certain aspects of the speech that I think will begin this process of winning over the soul of America and begin that process of finding that unity they spoke about so much in the speech. As I mentioned, I think he missed a few key opportunities. And in that respect, the speech isn't as successful as you'd want it to be. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And I know that the comments threads can be a very dangerous section. So I'm just going to make a simple ask. Can we make it about the speech and not about politics? We've acknowledged that there's different political orientations in this video. We've acknowledged that there's Democrat and there's Republican. We've acknowledged that there's a whole load of people who didn't vote for this president delivering this speech. Can we keep the politics out of it and just look at the speech? Just look at the elements of public speaking? That's all that I ask in the comments. And I suspect that might be too big an ask, but I'm going to make it anyway. Because if you don't ask, you don't get. So let me know, how do you think that Biden was able to get across the soul of America in his speech? And if you'd like to learn about some of the other aspects that I had to leave on the cutting room floor, I can maybe make a part 2 of this video talk about some of the things like his change in styles, about his demarcation lines. There's all sorts of interesting things that I ultimately cut out of the video for the sake of length. And at the risk of making this video even longer, I'm going to end it right there. Let me know if you'd like to see a part 2, and I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Joe Biden's Soul of America.